plastic shoes from the 1950s, and they're kind of tacky, but they're kind of Cinderella, slippery as well. I really love them, and these are just so outrageous. I mean, they look like they could be from the 1980s.
Yeah, these have got like such an 80s feel to them, don't they?
Yeah. Okay, so this is the 1960s. This again is another really big shift from the 1950s, although you do still see some of the silhouettes that stay. The stiletto heel, the sort of the pointed stiletto heel is still around. And this is worn by sort of middle-aged women predominantly. The thing that happens in the 60s, of course, is sort of a youth revolution. You have a model like Twiggy who really changes the silhouette, and so shoes change as well. Shoes are low to the ground, they've got a square toe, bright colours, and you get the Pilgrim Pump, which is probably the most famous silhouette of this time. And the Pilgrim Pump was designed by Roger Vivier, and we have a sort of a very early example from the very early 60s by Vivier, and this is sort of a pre-version of the Pilgrim Pump. And these are black satin with a rhinestone buckle. And Ferragamo created the Vara pump in the 60s. This was actually created by his daughter Fiamma after he died. And this is probably the most famous Ferragamo silhouette that we know now. So this happened in the 60s, and of course something that's
so ironic because and then I hate flat shoes. So
do you?
Well, it's interesting that of all the good to go, 70s.
So this is the 1970s, and the 70s is often called the decade in fashion where anything goes. It's the first time when, across the board, people really start looking to other decades for inspiration. You get a lot of reworking of the 1930s and the 1940s, and of course that's something that's very, very common in fashion now. It really, really took off in the 70s. So with shoes, you see a lot of contrasts. So you have influences of things like disco, you have a lot of platforms, but you also have influences of movements like punk, which of course is very, very different. So there's a lot of contrast in the 70s, which is really, really interesting for shoe design. You especially see it in shoe design. And something really amazing that we found for the exhibition was this pair of roller skate shoes from the 1970s, and this was sort of a very short-lived disco trend. But I just think they're amazing. You push the button and the wheels come down. So
they're like the original.
The original little.
Like pop. What are they called?
Pop wheels.
Yeah, pop wheels. Yeah.
So during the day you can just push the button and the wheels come up, and you just walk around like you're in your little sandals. And then at night time when you want to go out partying, you push the button and out your roller skates come, and you're on your way.
Oh, I love the 70s.
Yeah. And we've got these beautiful Charles Jourdan platform clog heels. Okay, so here we are in the 80s, of course, lots of excess in the 80s.
Everyone's favourite decade.
That's right, we have lots of fabulous high heels from this time, because that was really something that was huge in the 80s, was lots and lots of high heels, really, really embellished heels, crazy colours, lots of fabrics, lots of different materials, and this of course was mixed with a matching bag. That was really big in the 80s, the matching shoes and bag. We've got some beautiful Yves Saint Laurent globe heels, and these are probably the lowest heels that we've got, and this is a style that Yves Saint Laurent really references from Roger Vivier, who created a pair of globe heels in the 1960s. But then we have these wonderfully outrageous Cassidy soccer ball shoes, patent leather, absolutely over the top.
There's really not much that you can say about the 80s other than it was all about the pump.
Yeah.
And it's interesting coming out of the 1970s, which was such an interesting decade of referencing other decades. Yeah. I mean, I guess you kind of the pump references the 50s.
Well, the 80s is really the 50s. It was really funny this morning. I walked past a coffee shop. This guy yelled out to me that I looked really good, and it was so 80s. And I felt like going, no. Down the street this morning on the way here, and I walked past a coffee shop, and this guy yelled out to me, "Oh, you look really fantastic. It's so 80s." I just felt like saying, "No,
let's
actually,
just take a full look."
It's the 1950s. But that's something that the 80s really does, is that it reworks the 1950s. So I think the thing that makes the pump really popular at this time is because it's really referencing that sort of era of the stiletto heel, the 1950s. So you really see that in these shoes. They're very sort of pointy, and you get the stiletto heel. So. Okay, and we finished the exhibition in the 1990s, and I think, again, this is an era of really big contrasts. The 90s is kind of similar to the 70s in that way, and I think we've illustrated that really well here. We've got a pair of Doc Martens next to these beautiful crystal Gucci sandals from this time. And I think that really illustrates the 90s. You've sort of got, you know, this continued excess from the 1980s, but there's also really strong influences from things like grunge. And heels are really experimented with a lot in the 1990s as well.